Hello everyone, Helen here, and we're in the camper van. So I'm going to take you today on the short trip that my husband Phil and I went on just a week before last Christmas. That's 2024, and we just fancied getting away for a couple of days from all the Christmas preparations, and also it was my birthday, so I wanted to celebrate my birthday in the van. And we didn't go far, we just went to the next county north of County Durham, to Northumberland, but it still felt like we were miles away from home. So I hope you're going to enjoy seeing what we got up to and maybe learning a little bit of history along the way. So we set off on the Monday afternoon, the 16th of December, going north from Durham, where we live, up the A1 towards Alnwick, as you can see here on the map. We were treated to fairly mild weather for December. In fact, temperatures were very similar to the temperatures we'd had when we were in Orkney earlier in the year, when it was never warmer than about 13 centigrade, which is about 55 Fahrenheit. We had the crocheted Christmas camper van that I'd made on board, and we listened to the 1984 Lindisfarne Christmas concert that Phil and I actually went to, and which Phil later recorded when it was broadcast on the radio. It always brings back happy memories, and of course I love singing along to it. The traffic was fairly light and free-flowing, and in no time at all we arrived in the small town of Alnwick, passing by the main reason for our visit to Alnwick, Barter Books, and we drove through the town to have a look at a couple of possible overnight spots while it was still light, which is always preferable to arriving when it's really dark. Once we'd done that, we returned to Barter Books, which is one of the largest second-hand bookshops in the UK, and a place that I love but very rarely get to visit. The bookshop is housed in what was once Alnwick's fine Victorian railway station, built in 1887. There are clues all around that indicate you're in an old station, such as this old drinking fountain. The station was particularly large and grand for such a small town because the Dukes of Northumberland lived nearby in Alnwick Castle, and they needed an impressive place suitable for receiving royalty, as can be seen in this painting showing the occasion in 1908 when the future King George V and his wife Mary came to visit. The station was closed in 1968 as a result of the dreaded beaching cuts. At first, just a small room in the station became the home of Barter Books, opened originally as a place for swapping books in 1991 by an American lady called Mary Manley from Missouri, supported by her husband Stuart, a businessman from County Durham. The bookshop now occupies a huge area, including the original waiting rooms, which have become a cafe, the Station Buffet. After an initial brief wander round, Phil and I decided that it was time for refreshments. The cafe actually now uses several rooms, each with its own distinctive decor. We sat in the skylight room, only discovered as recently as 2008, because there were no access points from inside the shop, and no one even knew it was there. All of the rooms are so cosy, with open fires as there would have been in the Victorian station, and it all just adds to the general ambience of the place, like stepping back in time to the days when many of the old books that are for sale had not long been published. If you've visited Barter Books before, you'll know that this is where an original Keep Calm and Carry On poster, issued by the British government in 1939, was discovered in the year 2000 by one of the shop owners. Few original copies are now in existence, but many copies of this poster and variations of it have since been made. Barter Books is simply the best kind of book lover's Aladdin's cave that you could imagine. There are plenty of cosy places to sit and browse, and interesting things to look at, aside from the books themselves. Words of wisdom, famous quotes, and the most fantastic murals. This one, painted by Alnwick artist Peter Dodd, depicts 33 famous writers. and you can find out which ones by visiting the Barter Books website. And one of the very popular features is the model railway that links the bookcases in one of the rooms. So come with me while we have a good look around. I had a really good browse through some old annuals to see if there were any books that I might choose to take home with me, plus a very interesting book about hats, which I was quite tempted by. Eventually, after making a small number of purchases each, we had to drag ourselves away into the dark night. We drove to the nearby village of Rennington to go for a meal at the Horseshoes Inn. Not surprisingly, it was originally the place where the village blacksmith worked from the 1800s. It has very comfortable, pleasant surroundings, and of course it was tastefully decorated for Christmas, and all the food we had was absolutely delicious. Soon we were off in the dark again and heading for our overnight spot. We were very happy with our choice of overnight parking place, a long stay car park just outside Alnwick. It had provided us with a very peaceful night. After breakfast we opened our advent calendars. We don't normally have chocolatey ones, and I won't be in a hurry to buy them again actually, because we found them to be rather disappointing for several reasons that I won't bore you with right now. We were underway soon after 9 o'clock, heading for the coast. The weather was a bit dull when we arrived in Alnmouth, but it was dry and fairly mild, so no complaints really. Alnmouth is one of my absolute favourite places and one that we've often visited, although it does get quite busy in the summer months. We decided first of all to go for a walk along the beach. The tide was right out, and it was just wonderful to be out in that wide open space, breathing in the sea air. By then we were ready for refreshments, so we found a little tea room, and I enjoyed a delicious toasted tea cake with my cup of tea. And we then had a short stroll through the village. We paused to have a look at the nativity display outside the church, and called in at Scott's Deli and Grocery, which is filled to the brim with all sorts of delicious foodie treats. And we chose a couple of things to take away for our lunch later, as well as doing a bit of Christmas shopping. We then headed out of Alnmouth and drove inland a little way to Morpeth. Morpeth is a lovely little market town on the River Wansbeck, and it has ancient roots dating back to the year 1080. It's a thriving place with an excellent selection of shops, as well as several places of interest. We sat in the van to eat our delicious Christmas sausage rolls and Portuguese custard tarts that we'd bought in Alnmouth, then went for a walk through Carlisle Park, with a particular destination in mind. We crossed the river and eventually passed by the remains of a Motte and Bailey castle built in the 11th century and in use for about 200 years until a new castle was built elsewhere in Morpeth. We passed through the William Turner Garden, a celebration of William Turner, who was born in Morpeth in 1508 and who became an eminent botanist, herbalist and physician after studying at Cambridge University. And later he published a book about the plants that were in common use as medicines in the 16th century. But the main reason for our walk in the park was to visit the statue of a heroine from the early 20th century, Emily Wilding Davison. Although she was born in London, she moved to Morpeth in her early 20s. The statue was placed here in 2018 to commemorate the role Emily played in putting pressure on the government to give women the right to vote, working alongside many other brave women in the Women's Social and Political Union who became known as suffragettes, and who underwent all sorts of sacrifices to keep the issue of women's suffrage in the public eye. She played an active role in following the movement's motto, "Deeds, not words," and was in and out of prison 49 times, often having been force-fed because she'd gone on hunger strike or treated in other inhumane ways. Emily is famous for having paid the ultimate sacrifice for the cause, killed when she ran out in front of the King's horse at the Epsom Derby in 1913. There was a huge funeral procession for her in London, and then she was brought north to be buried in the family plot at a church in Morpeth. Our next stop was the Morpeth Chantry, which we got to by crossing the footbridge, which in 1869 was built on the site of the original 13th century bridge. You can still see the remains of the stone bridge piers and abutments below the footbridge. The nearby Telford Bridge was built in 1831 to replace the 13th century stone bridge. The building, known as the Chantry, also originates in the 13th century and was first used as a chapel and a toll house for the river crossing. It's subsequently been used for many things, but today it houses the Tourist Information Office, a bagpipe museum, and the Northumberland Craft Centre. We had a very enjoyable time looking at all the different local crafts for sale and did a bit of Christmas shopping too. Before leaving, we had a quick wander around the Bagpipe Museum, although we didn't read everything as thoroughly as usual because we had somewhere else to get to before it closed. However, if you are interested in this aspect of traditional folk music and folk instruments, there is a lot of fascinating information to be discovered here, including the local version of bagpipes, the Northumbrian pipes. We had a lovely time wandering down Morpeth's very Christmassy High Street, where there were plenty of beautifully dressed shop windows. Until eventually we reached the shop which was one of our reasons for visiting Morpeth, the cheese shop. The shop is located right next to Morpeth's 17th century clock tower, where the 8 bells, housed in the top story of the tower, are rung by a group of bell ringers. It was built in 1640, with the final story added in 1705. The clock was added in the 18th century and still chimes today every quarter of an hour. The tower was used as a jail until 1802, with stocks placed in front of it, and in the later 19th century it housed Morpeth's fire station. If you've watched any of our previous campervan videos, you'll know that we're always on the lookout for a good cheese, particularly ones that are local to wherever we're visiting. We spent ages in the shop trying to choose which cheeses to have on our Christmas table to share with our guests. In the end, we chose 7 different cheeses, 4 of them local, and we weren't disappointed with the choices that we'd made. We had a final stroll through Morpeth as darkness came, and we were very pleased to come upon an excellent sweet shop, another place for buying a few Christmas treats. It was then time to leave, and we enjoyed the wonderful display of Christmas lights as we slowly made our way through the centre of Morpeth towards the little village of Walton, where we had another excellent pub meal, a very festive turkey burger with added stuffing and other traditional trimmings. After that we had a short drive to our overnight spot, and I had a bit of crochet time before it was time to go to sleep. I absolutely loved waking up on my birthday morning in this place, where we'd stayed once 2 years previously, though on that occasion it was snowy and very cold. This time we only had to contend with strong winds, which buffeted the van all night, though it was actually quite soothing. We were staying at a place called Winter's Gibbet, where there are stunning views all around, and it's a really quiet, remote area. We set off as soon as we'd had breakfast and paused by the gibbet that this spot is named after. The original gibbet was placed here in 1791. The body of the murderer William Winter was hung here after he was condemned to death. And I'll leave a link at the end of this video to our previous visit here if you want to hear more about that story. We journeyed onwards, heading for the little town of Rothbury. We enjoyed having a brief look around the small shops in Rothbury, although sadly the yarn shop was closed, and we purchased a few bits and bobs, including a birthday cake for me to have later. I particularly loved this window display, created simply from white paper and card, but so effective. Some lovely origami trees and a moving watermill wheel, and all beautifully lit up. We drove the short distance to Cragside, a fantastic National Trust property that we've been to many times, and actually came to a couple of years ago for my birthday. As soon as you arrive on the estate, you're instantly impressed by the landscaping and wonderful setting for Cragside House, once owned by one of the most famous local families, the Armstrongs. Once we'd parked, I decided to video a quick chat for the next day's Vlogmas episode, sitting in rather a lovely location. You can see here the views down to the lake, which was part of Lord Armstrong's extensive landscaping of the estate. An extra treat for the day was that we were joined by our daughter, Sarah. We had a lovely time together, looking at all the beautiful things in the National Trust shop before going to the cafe for some lunch. We then walked up to Cragside House, passing the tallest living Christmas tree in the UK, although obviously it's better to see it after dark because it doesn't show up too well amongst all the other trees during the daylight. Lord William Armstrong and his wife Lady Margaret were married in 1835, and building began at Cragside in 1863, initially just a small fishing lodge. William was a talented engineer and inventor, and his wife, who was a keen gardener, so they both thrived on the huge project that they'd undertaken to create a luxurious home and fabulous gardens. One of Cragside's biggest claims to fame is that it was the first house in the world to be lit by hydroelectricity, and also that made use of the newly invented incandescent light bulbs. We'd come to Cragside on this occasion to see the house all decorated for Christmas. They'd taken the theme of spirits of the forest, and we were told when we entered to imagine that at midnight on Christmas Eve, the spirits of the forest had worked their way into the house and caused all kinds of mayhem. We still had some daylight left when we came out of the house, so we had time to walk around some of the gardens. Firstly, the slightly hazardous rock garden that's built into the craggy hillside. I don't recommend trying to video it while walking along. Then across the bridge and up to the formal garden. Although there's little variation in colour in the garden in December, I was very impressed by the different varieties of holly trees, some with the most gorgeous variegated leaves. We slowly strolled through the ornamental gardens, imagining how colourful it will be in the spring and summer. And I enjoyed watching for ages, actually, the wind blowing ripples in the water where there's normally a fountain, with the reflections of one of the conservatories all ruffled up by the little waves. And I love this photo that Sarah took of Phil and I. Close to closing time, we had to depart from Cragside, and along with Sarah we drove to a riverside place in Rothbury so that we could have a little birthday tea for me. was then time to go home. So we said goodbye to Sarah and set off on the journey home through Northumberland and into County Durham, and it took us about an hour and a half to get home. So we had a really, really lovely time. I hope you enjoyed going with us, and I shall look forward to taking you on another campervan trip before too long. I actually haven't taken you on the one we went on last October, November to East Anglia, so I will get on with that and show you that at some point. And obviously we've got more plans coming up for campervan trips in 2025. So until I see you again, keep yourself nice and busy, take great care of yourself, and I will see you again very soon. Okay, bye.